Senior Chief Petty Officer Darius Hale had given much of his adult life to serving his country. He had completed 3 combat deployments and earned a chest full of decorations, including the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor, and the Purple Heart. Every medal represented a moment most people could never imagine enduring, much less surviving. This was a man who had jumped from aircraft over enemy territory in complete darkness. He had remained underwater for several minutes while armed hostile fighters walked only 6 feet above him. He had carried a wounded brother on his back for 2 miles across hostile ground without stopping. Then, during an ordinary afternoon, Darius stood beside a gas pump in his full-dress uniform, every ribbon, badge, and decoration reflecting the sunlight. A police officer looked at all of it and saw only one thing: a threat. What the officer did not know was that someone had already begun recording. The encounter would end his career, help bring down a sitting state senator, and force the nation to confront one brutal and deeply uncomfortable question. What did the country truly think of the men who bled for it? Darius's morning began the way most of his mornings did, long before the world around him fully awakened. By the time the sky began to brighten, he had already completed a 6-mile run along the eastern edge of Fort Campbell. Most people would have considered the distance a punishment. Darius considered it prayer. During those quiet miles, his mind became still. The noise of the world had not yet crowded around him. He existed simply as a body moving through the cool air, a heartbeat, and a pair of lungs working in rhythm. While running, Darius Hale was not a husband, a son, a statistic, or a symbol. He was simply a man who loved his country with the same stubborn and aching devotion most people reserved for their children. Darius had served in the United States Navy for many years and spent much of that service as a Navy SEAL. Before his recent transfer to Joint Training Operations at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, he had been assigned to SEAL Team 3 in Coronado, California. He had completed 2 deployments in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He had also participated in 4 classified operations whose details he would carry to his grave. His dress uniform displayed the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, and numerous additional ribbons and badges. To a trained observer, those decorations told the story of a man who had repeatedly placed himself between danger and the people he had sworn to protect. Darius stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and possessed the solid build of someone who appeared carved rather than grown. His closely cropped hair had begun showing a faint trace of gray near the temples. His mother, Marlene Hale, always pointed it out with a mixture of pride and sadness. "That is wisdom showing up, baby," she would tell him, touching his face with both hands as she had when he was a small boy. "That is the weight of everything you have carried." Marlene was a retired school teacher from Memphis, Tennessee. She had raised Darius alone after his father, Victor Hale, died suddenly while Darius was still a child. Marlene worked 2 jobs during much of her son's adolescence. She drove him to every swimming practice. She sat in the front row when he graduated from basic underwater demolition/SEAL training in Coronado, tears streaming down her face and one hand pressed firmly against her chest as though she were physically holding her heart inside her body. Darius was returning to Fort Campbell after speaking to students at a middle school in Clarksville. He made those visits quietly several times each year. There was no media, no camera crew, and no public relations agenda. There was only Darius standing before a classroom of children who did not necessarily believe their lives could become extraordinary, and offering himself as evidence that they could. He always wore his dress uniform during those visits. It was not vanity. Darius had learned that the children needed to see it. They needed to understand what belonging to something larger than oneself looked like when carried upon the body of a real person. The school visit had gone well. One young student named Caleb had looked at him with wide, completely serious eyes and asked whether Navy SEALs were afraid of sharks. Darius crouched until they were at the same height. "The sharks are afraid of us," he answered with equal seriousness. The classroom erupted in laughter. It was the best moment of his week. While driving back to the base, the low fuel warning appeared on his dashboard. Darius left the highway and entered a BP station on the outskirts of Clarksville. It should have been an ordinary errand. A man in uniform stopping to buy gasoline. Nothing that followed was ordinary. The station stood at the intersection of 2 quiet roads. It had 4 pumps, a small attached convenience store, and a hand-painted sign advertising boiled peanuts that had faded beneath the sun until the words were almost impossible to read. A rusted blue pickup truck rested beside the air pump. A teenage boy wearing a red hoodie sat on the curb eating chips. An older white woman in a sun hat loaded grocery bags into a minivan. Darius parked his black Ford F-150 beside pump number 3. He stepped out and inserted his card into the reader. The station's security footage would later establish that only 63 seconds passed between the moment Darius left his truck and the moment he heard a police cruiser door open behind him. For 63 seconds, he had simply stood at the pump in full military dress uniform. His metals reflected the sunlight. His back remained straight while he waited for the fuel tank to fill. Then Officer Bryce Calloway of the Clarksville Police Department stepped out of his cruiser and approached him. Bryce was a relatively young officer with limited experience. He was white, of average height, and had the kind of face that seemed to disappear from memory once someone stopped looking at it. Colleagues who later spoke privately with investigative reporter Elena Santos of the Nashville Banner did not describe Bryce as an especially good or especially bad officer. In the language of bureaucracy, he was considered average. He followed procedures when he felt they were useful. He ignored them when he believed no one was watching. Several minor complaints had already been filed against him. One involved an aggressive traffic stop of a Latino family. Another concerned the unnecessarily harsh language he used toward a teenager during a curfew check. Neither complaint resulted in meaningful discipline. Bryce entered the BP station intending to purchase coffee and a packaged sandwich, as he often did during his shift. What he saw was a large black man standing beside a truck. Later, he told himself that Darius's posture had seemed aggressive. He told himself that something about the man appeared suspicious. He repeatedly told himself that he had only been doing his job. The security camera told another story. It showed Darius standing completely still. He made no threatening movement. He did not gesture or even turn toward the approaching cruiser. Bryce came up behind him. "Hey, stop, do not move." Darius turned slowly and deliberately, the way someone moved when training had placed every reflex beneath conscious control. He looked directly at the officer. His face remained neutral. His hands were clearly visible and relaxed beside him. "Good afternoon," he said. Bryce examined him from head to toe. His gaze moved across the uniform, medals, rank insignia, and the trident insignia of a naval special warfare operator. He appeared to register none of it. "Let me see some identification. Step away from the vehicle." Darius did not move away immediately. He studied Bryce with the calm, measuring gaze of a man who had spent his career identifying potential threats. "May I ask what this is about?" I said, "Step away from the vehicle and show me identification." "I am a senior chief petty officer in the United States Navy, currently assigned to Fort Campbell. I stopped here for gasoline. Can you explain the problem?" Bryce's jaw tightened. "Sir, I will not ask again." 4 witnesses observed what happened next. The teenage boy in the red hoodie who would later post his recording online. The woman wearing the sun hat, Elaine Porter, who would provide a formal statement. The station attendant, Imran Qureshi, a Pakistani-American man, watching through the convenience store window with one hand pressed over his mouth. And the security camera, which did not blink, turn away, or lie. Bryce grabbed Darius by the arm. Darius became completely still. Any trained fighter understood that there were 2 kinds of stillness. One was the stillness of surrender. The other was the stillness of a man capable of ending a confrontation within seconds, who had consciously, painfully, and deliberately chosen not to do so. Darius Hale was very still. "I am not resisting," he said in a voice so controlled it barely sounded human. "I am not resisting. My hands are visible. I am an active member of the United States military, and I am wearing my uniform. I need you to state clearly why I am being detained." Bryce was already using his radio. 2 additional Clarksville Police Department cruisers soon entered the station. One belonged to Corporal Mateo Navarro, an experienced department veteran. He would later describe arriving and immediately sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. Mateo was Latino, compactly built, and had dark eyes that absorbed a scene the way a camera captured an image, cataloging everything simultaneously. He stepped from his cruiser and looked at Darius. The senior chief stood with his hands raised slightly away from his body in the universal posture of de-escalation. Mateo saw the uniform. He saw the medals. He saw the trident. Something cold moved through him. The second cruiser belonged to Officer Jenna Hollis, a newer officer who had only recently completed field training. She remained close to her vehicle. Jenna would later admit that she had not known what she was supposed to do. Encouraged by the arrival of backup, Bryce tightened his grip on Darius's arm and ordered him to place both hands on the hood of his truck. "I need you to explain why I'm being ordered to do this," Darius said. His voice still carried that frightening calmness and iron precision. "I have committed no crime. I have made no threatening gesture or statement. I am clearly and directly asking for the legal basis of this detention. You are behaving suspiciously. I was standing beside a gas pump. You matched the description of a suspect in a robbery that occurred on this block." It was the first time Bryce mentioned a robbery. The claim would later be proven completely false. No robbery had occurred on that block. No robbery had been reported anywhere in Clarksville. Police dispatch logs later obtained by Elena Santos through a public records request contained no robbery call, no lookout bulletin, and no suspect description matching anything Bryce claimed. Mateo heard the statement. Something passed across his face, a flicker resembling shame. He said nothing. He would carry that silence for a long time. The teenager on the curb had already begun recording with his phone. His name was Malik Dawson. He was the son of an Army mechanic assigned to Fort Campbell and had grown up around military families. Malik understood what the trident represented. He understood the meaning of the Navy Cross. He watched a decorated man who had gone to war and returned being detained beside a gas pump while wearing his dress uniform. The forgotten bag of chips rested beside Malik on the curb. Something burned inside him, a fury he did not yet possess the language to describe. He kept recording. Elaine Porter stopped loading her minivan. She stood holding a bag of groceries, her face drained of color. "This is wrong," she called out. "What you are doing is wrong." Bryce glanced toward her. "Ma'am, please stay back." "I will not stay back. That man is wearing a military uniform. What's wrong with you?" Imran had come to the convenience store entrance. He was recording as well. Darius placed his hands on the hood of his truck. He did not do it because he had committed an offense or because the officer had given him a legitimate reason. He did it because he had performed the calculation black men in America learned to make, the calculation between dignity and survival. In that moment, Darius chose survival. He would deal with dignity afterward. His medals pressed against the cool metal of the truck's hood while Bryce searched him. The Navy Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart. Every decoration pressed against the hood of a truck at a gas station while sunlight angled between the pumps and Malik Dawson recorded from the curb. Mateo stood only a few feet away. He did not intervene. That failure would haunt him for years. A black government SUV entered the station during the detention. At first, no one except Darius recognized the man who stepped out. Still leaning against the truck while Bryce checked his information through dispatch, Darius heard the vehicle door and lifted his eyes. Something shifted inside his chest. He first recognized the shoes, then the gait, the way the man moved through space as though he possessed every square foot of air around him. Commander Alton Mercer, United States Navy. He was Darius's commanding officer at Fort Campbell's Joint Training Division. Alton was a stocky, silver-haired white man from outside Boston. His face resembled a topographical map of every difficult decision he had made. His voice sounded as though it had been cured in smoke and authority. Alton had been returning from a meeting when the base duty officer contacted him. The duty officer had received a call from Malik's father, Staff Sergeant Calvin Dawson. Malik had managed to telephone his father during the encounter. "Dad, they have a man in uniform at the BP station," he had said. "I think he is a SEAL. You need to call someone." Calvin found the duty officer's number with shaking hands. Alton immediately changed direction. He entered the gas station with squared shoulders and the absolute composure of a man who had coordinated extractions inside active combat zones. Then he faced Bryce. When Alton spoke, his voice was so quiet and precise that everyone in the station became silent to hear it. "Officer, what is the basis of this detention?" Bryce turned and noticed the naval uniform and silver eagle insignia of a commander. His posture straightened instinctively. "Sir, this individual was acting—" "This individual," Alton interrupted, "is Senior Chief Petty Officer Darius Hale of the United States Navy. He is a recipient of the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Service Medal. He serves directly under my command. He has more documented combat experience than you have experienced wearing that uniform." Alton paused. His gaze moved from Bryce to Mateo, then to Jenna, before returning to Bryce. "I need you to explain clearly and on the record the legal basis for this detention. There are cameras and witnesses present, and I assure you that my next telephone call will be to the Secretary of the Navy." The silence inside the BP station became the loudest silence any witness there could remember. Bryce opened his mouth. He closed it. Then he tried again. He was behaving suspiciously. He was pumping gasoline. There was a report of a robbery. There was no report. Alton had already taken out his phone. "I have been speaking with your department's dispatch center. There was no robbery, no lookout bulletin, no suspect description, and no related call. There was nothing." Bryce's face turned red as though it could not decide whether to reveal anger or fear. Mateo stepped backward. He would later say that this was the moment he realized he had made a decision he could never reverse. Alton turned toward Darius. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, a language belonging to men who had survived experiences impossible to explain. It was built from shared danger, mutual respect, and the particular grief of continuing to fight battles that should have ended long ago. "You all right, Senior Chief?" Darius straightened from the hood. He smoothed his jacket and carefully adjusted the position of his medals. "Yes, sir," he answered. "I am all right." But he was not. Not completely. Alton knew it. That knowledge settled between them like a stone. No one at the BP station knew that a state senator had been sitting inside a silver sedan at the far edge of the parking lot since before the confrontation began. Tennessee State Senator Preston Greer had stopped to use the restroom before attending a campaign event. He was preparing for another election campaign. Preston publicly presented himself as a passionate supporter of law enforcement and a critic of what he called anti-police rhetoric. He had built much of his political identity around backing the blue. During speeches at churches and county fairs, he often argued that police officers were being unfairly attacked and that the media manufactured stories about abuse. Preston watched the entire encounter from his car. His aide, Vivian Tran, sat beside him. "Senator, should we do something?" she asked. "Let us see how it plays out," he answered. Preston watched Bryce seize Darius. He saw a Navy SEAL in full dress uniform, medals and all, forced against his own truck and searched like a criminal. He watched Commander Mercer arrive and confront the officers. Then Preston started his vehicle and attempted to leave. He did not make it out of the parking lot. Elena Santos of the Nashville Banner stepped directly in front of his sedan. Elena was Filipino-American, small in stature, and afraid of almost nothing. She had been investigating the Clarksville Police Department's complaint history and gathering information about potentially racially biased stops throughout Montgomery County. Elena kept a police scanner in her car. She had been nearby when the dispatch traffic suddenly increased. She arrived with a recorder and phone camera in time to capture Alton's confrontation with Bryce. She also immediately recognized Senator Greer's sedan because she had seen it at several campaign events. Elena stood before the vehicle holding her recorder. "Senator Greer, did you witness this incident from beginning to end?" The senator lowered his window only a few inches. "Miss, I do not believe this is the appropriate moment. You have been a visible and outspoken supporter of the Clarksville Police Department. A decorated Navy SEAL was detained without cause at this gas station. Did you witness it?" Preston waited before answering. The pause was long enough to become an answer of its own. "I observed a police officer performing his duty." "Did you observe that officer fabricate a robbery report to justify a detention that had no lawful basis?" Another silence. "I believe you should direct those questions to the department." "Senator, with respect, I am speaking to you. You were here, you witnessed everything, and you were preparing to drive away." Preston raised his window. By then, 3 other witnesses had aimed their phones toward his vehicle. When Elena's investigation was published, the subheading read, "State Senator witnessed entire incident, remained silent, and attempted to leave." The report received millions of views. Malik posted his recording while he was still sitting on the curb. He added no caption or commentary. He simply uploaded the video. It showed Darius Hale with the Navy Cross gleaming upon his chest and both hands pressed against the hood of his truck while Bryce stood behind him. The medals were clearly visible. So was Darius's expression, that terrible controlled stillness. The recording captured Bryce pressing his hand between Darius's shoulder blades to keep him against the truck. That moment changed everything. The video quickly received hundreds of thousands of views. It soon appeared on major television networks and inside national publications. Malik appeared on morning news programs beside his father. He answered questions with a seriousness that visibly affected the hosts. "I knew it was wrong," Malik said. "I could see his medals. Everyone could see them. I do not understand how someone looks at that and decides he is dangerous." The military community responded with outrage that crossed demographic and political lines. Veterans from every branch, generation, and background expressed support. Active duty service members carefully communicated their anger without violating military regulations. The hashtag Stand with Senior Chief Hale spread nationwide. Naval Special Warfare Command released a formal statement expressing profound concern and complete support for Darius. The Secretary of the Navy personally called him. Darius missed the call because he had turned off his phone. After returning to the base, he changed out of his dress uniform. He carefully folded it and placed it on a chair. Then he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall. Eventually he called his mother. "Mama," he said when she answered. Marlene heard his voice and became silent in the way mothers did when they had feared a particular telephone call for years and suddenly realized that fear had been justified. "Tell me," she said. Darius told her everything. Afterward, Marlene remained quiet for a moment. "Baby, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me." "I am listening." "They did not take one thing from you, not one medal, not one mission, and not one piece of who you are. Do you understand? They could grab your arm, they could push you down, but everything that matters, everything that makes you Darius Hale, was beyond their reach." Her voice broke slightly before rebuilding itself. "I raised you to be unbreakable. You held yourself together when no one should have expected you to. That was not weakness, Darius. It was the strongest thing I have ever witnessed. Darius did not answer for a long time. He listened to his mother breathing. "Come home soon," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The consequences arrived rapidly and without mercy because the world was paying attention. The Clarksville Police Department placed Bryce Calloway on administrative leave after the video spread. Police Chief Raymond Pike held a press conference. He was a heavy-set department veteran nearing retirement. Standing before a room filled with cameras, he spoke with the weight of someone choosing each word while balanced upon a narrow ledge. The department, he said, had serious concerns about the stop. Bryce's stated justification did not match dispatch records. A complete investigation had begun. A reporter asked directly, "Chief Pike, did Officer Calloway lie about his reason for detaining Senior Chief Hale?" Raymond looked toward the cameras. "The investigation will establish the facts." The investigation established them quickly. There had been no robbery. There had been no lookout bulletin or police call. The dispatch records were completely clear. Bryce claimed his patrol car camera had malfunctioned. Department technicians discovered that it had been manually disabled shortly before he entered the BP station. Traffic cameras also showed that Bryce had driven past the station twice before stopping. He had seen Darius arrive. He had waited. The Internal Affairs report later obtained and published by Elena concluded that Bryce had conducted a pretextual stop without lawful cause, invented a justification afterward, and deliberately disabled his recording equipment in advance. The report also stated that his conduct reflected an existing pattern. It referenced the earlier complaints and 3 additional incidents recorded in his personnel file that had never developed into formal complaints. Bryce was terminated from the Clarksville Police Department. A written notice of dismissal was delivered to his home. He did not answer the door. His wife, Lauren, accepted the document. Witnesses later described her expression as that of someone who had known for a long time that this moment was coming. Montgomery County District Attorney Celeste Warren was an experienced prosecutor who did not make decisions impulsively. After Bryce's dismissal, she announced that a grand jury would consider criminal charges for filing a false police report and violating civil rights. The grand jury returned an indictment. Bryce entered a plea of not guilty. His attorney, Nolan Price, told reporters that the prosecution was politically motivated and that his client had been sacrificed to public anger. Elena published a feature about the indictment. The article later received a state journalism award. The consequences did not end with Bryce. Mateo Navarro submitted a formal written statement to Internal Affairs. He admitted arriving at the station, observing the detention, immediately recognizing that it lacked justification and failing to intervene. "I cannot claim that I did not know better," he wrote, "because I did. I recognized Senior Chief Hale's uniform. I understood his rank and decorations. I stood there and said nothing, and I must live with that." Mateo resigned from the Clarksville Police Department. No one forced him to leave, and the internal investigation had not recommended his termination. He explained his decision in a handwritten letter placed on Chief Pike's desk. "I do not know how to become the officer I want to be inside a system where this could happen and where I responded the way I did. I need to understand that somewhere else." Mateo moved back to San Antonio and later enrolled in a social work program. Officer Jenna Hollis was ordered to complete mandatory counseling and additional training. She remained with the department. In a private memorandum that eventually reached Elena through an anonymous source, Jenna wrote, "I keep seeing his face and the way he stood there. I knew it was wrong. I was afraid, and that is not good enough." It was not good enough, but it was honest. Senator Preston Greer's political problems began when the Nashville Banner published Elena's video of their exchange. The footage of Preston raising his window, choosing silence over accountability, and driving away appeared repeatedly in political coverage throughout Tennessee. His primary challenger, Marisol Vega, was a former public defender. She rapidly closed the gap between them in public polling and eventually moved ahead. Preston lost the election. His vote total fell significantly below the support he had received during the previous campaign. In his concession speech, he never mentioned the gas station incident. He said only that he was proud of his public service and wished his successor well. Few believed the statement. Vivian Tran resigned from Preston's staff after Elena's article appeared. She later became communications director for a veterans advocacy organization. Darius never watched the recording, not once. He did not view Malik's original video, the television reports, edited compilations, or reaction clips. Others told him what had been shown and how widely the footage had spread. He understood the scale of the story. He still refused to watch himself being detained. Darius returned to duty. He exercised. He swam. He briefed his unit, ate inside the dining facility, read during the quiet hours, and performed all the ordinary tasks forming the architecture of military life. Commander Alton Mercer checked on him regularly. There were no speeches or dramatic gestures. Alton would appear in the doorway and ask questions such as, "How is your physical training, Aig?" or "Are you eating enough?" Once he simply said, "Your mother called the base." Darius usually answered, "I am good, sir." Sometimes he meant it, other times he did not. Alton would nod and leave. Neither man needed to say what he truly meant. Men who had endured difficult things together did not always require words. After speaking at length with Marlene, Darius agreed to give one interview. He chose Elena Santos. They met inside a diner in Clarksville. Elena arrived early. Darius arrived exactly when expected, dressed in jeans, a gray pullover, and white sneakers. Without his uniform, he looked like someone working very hard to appear ordinary. They spoke for hours. Elena's recorder remained on throughout the conversation. Both ordered coffee. Darius also ordered a slice of pie and ate only half. Elena's profile appeared in both the Atlantic and the Nashville Banner under the title, "The Weight of What You Earned." The article began with Darius's medals. Then it moved through his childhood, his mother, his father's death, his SEAL training, deployments, and visits to middle schools. Finally, it reached the afternoon at the BP station. Elena understood that the meaning of the story did not exist only in the detention. It existed in the years of sacrifice that made the detention so unbearable. The article spread widely upon publication. It reached another enormous audience when a veteran podcaster read it aloud and became too emotional to continue without stopping. After the article appeared, Darius called Elena. "You understood it," he said. "I tried," she replied. "I know." They remained quiet for a moment. "Thank you," Darius said. "Thank you for speaking with me." Later, on a cold morning, Darius returned to the BP station. He did not fully understand why. The station had no meaning beyond what had happened there. It remained an ordinary business, with 4 pumps and a faded boiled peanut sign. Yet Darius drove back. He parked beside pump number 3 and stood in the cold air while his truck's tank filled. The station looked different. Imran had printed the photograph that circulated most widely. It showed Darius in full dress uniform, his medals illuminated by the afternoon sun. Imran placed the photograph inside a plain black frame behind the counter. Beneath it, he taped a handwritten note. "American hero, always welcome here." Darius did not know the photograph was there until he entered the store to pay in cash. He stood at the counter and looked at the image of himself from that afternoon. The man in the photograph appeared impossibly still. Darius said nothing. Imran watched him with the careful compassion of someone who had thought about another person's pain many times and was now standing in its presence. "That is a good man in that picture," Imran said quietly. Darius looked at him. Something changed in his face. A part of him released, like a door held tightly closed for too long, finally opening slightly. "I appreciate that," he answered. He paid for the gasoline. He shook Imran's hand. Then he drove toward the base through a gray, bright, and silent winter morning. Senior Chief Desmond Banks waited outside the barracks when Darius returned. Desmond had served beside him through conditions neither man cared to name. He knew Darius in the way one man could only know another after trusting him with his life. "You all right?" Desmond asked. Darius considered the question honestly. He searched inside himself, placing a hand upon the damaged structure to determine whether it remained standing. "Yes," he finally said, "I am all right." Desmond nodded. "Good. Commander Mercer wants us in the briefing room, and he is already in a mood." Darius laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and full, the kind of laughter that seemed surprised by its own existence. They entered the building together. Bryce Calloway's criminal trial began on a cold, gray morning when frost covered the courthouse steps. People arrived early, veterans wearing unit caps, community residents in heavy coats, and reporters balancing coffee cups with press credentials filled the hallway outside the courtroom. Not everyone found a seat. Those who remained outside followed the proceedings through quiet reports moving beyond the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom seemed to understand the significance of what was happening inside it. Flat winter light entered through tall windows, stripping away pretense and leaving everything exactly as it was. Assistant District Attorney Tessa Monroe led the prosecution. She was sharp, methodical, and patient. Tessa had handled many civil rights cases and understood that juries did not always follow emotion when asked to convict a police officer. Emotion could become a door swinging in either direction. She did not build her case upon it. She constructed the prosecution like a carpenter building a frame, piece by piece, joint by joint, nothing ornamental, everything necessary. She presented the dispatch logs. They were clean, There was no robbery call, no lookout bulletin, and no suspect description. She presented highway traffic camera footage showing Bryce's cruiser passing the BP station twice before entering. She introduced the patrol car recording system. Department technicians confirmed it had been manually disabled before Bryce arrived. It had not malfunctioned. It had been disabled. The distinction mattered. Tessa allowed the fact to remain in the courtroom without commentary and permitted the jurors to reach the conclusion themselves. She introduced the 2 previous complaints from Bryce's personnel file and the 3 additional incidents that never became formal grievances but remained in the record like old bruises. Then she presented the witnesses. Imran Qureshi testified wearing a dark sport coat he had carefully pressed. He described what he witnessed from the convenience store window in precise and measured language. He did not exaggerate. He did not perform. He simply recounted the truth in the order it happened. The truth was enough. Elaine Porter entered the witness box wearing her Sunday clothes. She gripped the chair's arms as if steadying herself. When she spoke, her voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger that had spent a long time searching for an authorized exit. He was wearing his full uniform, Elaine said. He had more medals on his chest than I have ever seen on another person, and that officer treated him as though he were nothing. The courtroom became silent. Commander Alton Mercer testified in dress uniform, silver-haired, square-shouldered, and immovable. He was asked to explain what he found upon arriving at the gas station. Alton answered without passion or theatrical emotion. His voice carried the documented precision of someone accustomed to writing incident reports in circumstances where feelings could not interfere with facts. He listed what he witnessed. He repeated what Bryce said. He described the information dispatch had provided before he arrived. Alton identified each of Darius's medals by its full title. He explained where Darius's hands had been positioned and where Bryce had placed his hand between Darius's shoulder blades. He described the change in Bryce's expression after seeing a superior officer's uniform. The emotional restraint devastated the courtroom. There was no grief in Alton's voice because he had locked it behind something visible. The cage was worse than tears. The defense attempted several strategies. Bryce's attorney claimed he had responded to a genuine perceived danger. He argued that the viral recording made it impossible to find an impartial jury. He called a use of force specialist who methodically attempted to characterize Bryce's conduct as consistent with police training. Tessa cross-examined the witness without aggression or theater. She moved through his testimony with the exhausted efficiency of a surgeon performing a familiar operation. By the time she finished, the expert's framework had been dismantled so quietly and thoroughly that several jurors stared down at their notes rather than at the witness. Darius did not testify. He made that decision after a careful conversation with his attorney. The evidence did not require his voice to possess weight. Darius sat inside the gallery at the beginning and the end of the trial. He wore civilian clothing, dark jeans, and a simple jacket. There was nothing intended to announce his identity. He watched with the same controlled attention he brought to every responsibility. He did not look away. When the jury returned after deliberations, Bryce remained at the defense table. He did not look toward Darius. He stared at his hands, then at the table, and finally into the particular emptiness people focused upon when they already understood what was coming and were deciding how to survive its arrival. The 4 persons stood. The courtroom inhaled. Guilty on both charges. Filing a false police report. Interfering with constitutional rights under color of law. The courtroom did not erupt. There were no cheers or dramatic celebrations. Instead, everyone released a collective breath. It was the sound of people letting go of something they had carried for far too long. Someone in the back cried. A veteran near the aisle pressed one fist against his mouth. Bryce received a federal prison sentence, a lengthy period of supervised probation, and a permanent prohibition against working in law enforcement. He did not speak during sentencing. His attorney spoke for him in language that sounded careful, hollow, and largely meaningless to the people listening. Darius did not experience triumph. He did not feel the clean sense of release he might once have imagined. He felt something more complicated and more honest than satisfaction. It was grief extending beyond his own experience. It reached backward toward every man who had stood where he had stood, without a camera, without a commander arriving in a government vehicle, and without a teenager on a curb brave enough to press the record button. The men whose names never became hashtags. The men whose cases never produced verdicts. Darius felt their presence inside the courtroom. He carried their weight. He did not put it down. He walked from the courthouse into the pale afternoon. Desmond Banks waited at the curb with the truck's engine running. He looked toward Darius without asking for a speech. "How do you feel?" Darius stood in the thin sunlight and allowed the air to touch his face. "Like it is not over," he answered. Desmond considered the words and nodded. "You are right, it is not." They drove back to the base. A river moved beside the highway, silver and indifferent, traveling in the only direction water knew. Darius continued serving in the United States Navy before eventually receiving an honorable discharge. He settled in Memphis near his mother. Together with Alton Mercer, who also retired, Darius established a nonprofit organization called the Trident Foundation. The foundation provided legal resources, counseling, and advocacy to military veterans who experienced discrimination or violations of their rights. Darius sent Malik Dawson a personal letter after the verdict. He explained that courage did not require a SEAL Trident age or military rank. What Malik had done, speaking up, recording, and refusing to look away, mattered more than the boy understood. Malik later enrolled at Tennessee State University to study journalism. His professor placed a printed image from the original recording upon her office door with a handwritten note. This is why it matters. Imran's framed photograph remained on the wall behind the counter at the BP station. The frame gathered dust, but the man inside the photograph remained just as still, just as decorated, and just as unbroken. Marlene Hale kept a copy of Elena's Atlantic profile on the coffee table in her Memphis home. She read it repeatedly. She read it when she felt proud. She read it when she felt afraid. She read it whenever she needed to remember that she had raised someone who remained composed while the world attempted to convince him he was not worth the effort. He had always been worth it. What happened at the BP station was never only one man's story. It was a mirror held before something much larger. It was a test of who people were and what they refused to ignore. Darius Hale carried a lifetime of sacrifice into a gas station and was made to feel like a criminal, yet he never broke. He never lowered himself to the level of what was being done to him. He stood straight, kept his hands visible, and trusted that the truth would perform its duty as long as people were watching. People were watching because a teenage boy had the courage to press record. That was the lesson. Courage did not always look like a Navy SEAL. Sometimes it looked like a teenager sitting on a curb beside a half-eaten bag of chips. When this story moves you and makes you feel something real, do not allow that feeling to end here. Like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe and activate notifications because these are the stories that must be told, the stories that make people feel awake, alive, and accountable. We will see you in the next one.